In the spring of 1940, the world was held in a collective, terrified breath. The gears of the Nazi war machine had ground through Western Europe with a speed that defied belief. The British Expeditionary Force lay trapped against the surf at Dunkirk, and the shadow of a new, dark reality was beginning to solidify over the continent. At the center of this shadow stood one of the most effective rhetors in human history, Adolf Hitler. Hitler understood a terrifying truth. You don't need to invent a lie to destroy the world. You only need to shift the rhetoric around it. He didn't invent eugenics or the pseudoscience of a super race. Those ideas had been lingering in the fringes of academia for decades. A cold collection of theories looking for a voice. Hitler provided that voice. He understood that for those ideas to move from the lecture hall to the concentration camp, they needed a linguistic catalyst. He used rhetoric as a wrecking bar. He twisted language into a weapon of exclusion, used a perverted logic to justify the cleansing of humanity, and through his speech, he metaphorically and then physically built a reality where the unthinkable became the inevitable. He showed the world that a master of language can construct a prison for the human soul just as easily as an architect builds a cell of stone. But contrast that darkness with another man, an aging statesman standing before a microphone in the British Parliament. The situation was objectively grim. France had fallen. America was still silent across the Atlantic. The logic of the moment, the cold, hard facts on the ground, suggested that surrender was the only rational path. But this man was a brother Mason. Brother Winston Churchill knew that when the physical reality is falling apart, the orator must build a new reality out of the very air he breathes. On June 4th, 1940, he didn't just offer a strategic update or a tally of supplies. He offered a rhetorical shift that would turn the tide of the 20th century. He famously declared, "We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Churchill didn't just report on the war. He ended the psychological defeat. He used rhetoric as a trowel, spreading the cement of fortitude over a crumbling national spirit. He understood that speech is a symbolic action. By declaring that they would never surrender, he made it so. He created a psychological sacred space where the British people were no longer victims of a super race, but the protagonists of a heroic epic. These two men, one using language to foment hate and the other using it to rally civilization, prove that rhetoric is not just talk. It is the art of building the world we inhabit. As Masons, we are specifically tasked to study this art, not to become demagogues, but to become architects of harmony. Today we're going to explore the philosophical underpinnings of rhetoric, how it metaphorically creates the realities of our lodges, and why a gradual progression in the living language is the most valuable Masonic undertaking you will ever begin. To understand why we study rhetoric, we have to look back at the friction in ancient Athens between two types of speakers. On one side, you had the Sophists. These were the professional spin doctors of the ancient world. They were brilliant, certainly, but they were dangerous because their goal was purely mercenary. To a Sophist, rhetoric was a game of winning, using verbal gymnastics to make the weaker argument appear the stronger. They didn't care about what was right. They cared about what was persuasive. In our craft, we are taught to be something entirely different. We aren't Sophists. We are Masons. The difference lies in the heart. While the Sophist seeks to overwhelm or manipulate his audience to achieve an end, the Mason seeks to illuminate. Our rhetoric is governed by the square and the compasses. We use language to bridge gaps between men, to conciliate true friendship, and to explain complex moral truths in a way that helps a brother improve himself. If you possess the power of speech but lack the foundation of virtue, you are merely a clever deceiver. You might be able to rally a crowd, but you aren't building a temple. You're building a facade. Masonic rhetoric is an ethical obligation. It's the realization that when we open our mouths, we have the power to either wound or heal, to confuse or clarify. We study this art specifically so we can use our voices to serve the great architect and our fellow man, ensuring that our word is as reliable as a plumb line. There's a beautiful relationship in our system between logic and rhetoric. Think of it through the lens of operative masonry. Logic is the blueprint. It's the internal structure, the why behind the building. It's a silent process of making sure your ideas actually make sense and hang together without contradicting one another. Rhetoric, on the other hand, is the actual construction. It is the moment those silent thoughts take physical form through vibration and sound. This means that our rhetoric is effectively the mirror of your mind. If your internal logic is a mess, if your thoughts are scattered, biased, or irrational, then your speech will be a crooked wall. No matter how much verbal paint you slap on it, the building won't stand. You cannot speak clearly if you have not first thought clearly. This is why the fellowcraft is encouraged to study the 7 liberal arts and sciences in a specific order. You cannot master rhetoric without first mastering logic. For the Mason, speech is the evidence of his internal progress. When we listen to a brother speak in the lodge, whether he is delivering a lecture or simply offering a greeting, we are seeing the architecture of his soul. Mastering rhetoric is the daily practice of making sure that what comes out of your mouths accurately reflects a mind that has been squared and leveled. It is the external proof that the internal work is being done. We also have to address the cement that holds the whole structure together: truth. In the context of rhetoric, truth is what separates a master mason from a manipulator. The world is full of rhetoric in the modern cynical sense: advertising, political spin, social media outrage. This is language used to bypass a person's reason and trigger their emotions for the speaker's benefit. Manipulation creates a false reality, a hall of mirrors where the audience is led to act against their own interests. Masonic rhetoric, however, must be anchored in reality. It is a tool used to uncover truth, not to bury it. When we speak on the square, we are committing to a linguistic honesty that creates a shared reality of trust. Think about the sacred space of a lodge room. Why does it feel different than a boardroom or a locker room? It's because of the rhetoric. Every word spoken in a tiled lodge is intended to be true without error, certain and most true. When we use language ethically, we create a reality where harmony is actually possible. We build an environment where men can trust that a yes is a yes, and a promise is a covenant. Without the foundation of truth, rhetoric is just a wrecking bar painted to look like a trowel. But with truth, our speech becomes the very tool that brings the great architect's order out of the world's chaos. If you ever sat in a lodge during a degree, you felt it. There is a shift in the air. The outside world, with its traffic noise, its bills, and its politics, it fades away. We call this a sacred space. But from a psychological perspective, it's a reality built entirely out of language. In linguistics, there's a concept called speech acts. Now, don't let the term intimidate you. It doesn't require a PhD in linguistics like the one I studied for. A speech act is simply the realization that sometimes saying something is actually doing something. Think about when a judge says, "I sentence you to 10 years," or when a minister says, "I now pronounce you man and wife." They aren't just describing a situation. They are creating a new state of existence through the utterance itself. Freemasonry is essentially a series of high-stakes speech acts. When a candidate stands in the northeast corner and hears the words of the charge, or when the worshipful master declares a lodge open, we aren't just reciting a script. We are performing a reality into being. The specific cadence, the archaic vocabulary, and the rhythmic flow of the rituals serve as the scaffolding that holds the psychological building together. We use these words to partition a moment of time where we agree to treat each other as brethren, governed by a higher law of morality. We speak the lodge into existence. We often talk about the rough and perfect ashlars, the stones that represent our progress from natural imperfection to spiritual refinement. But consider that this applies to our common tongue as well. Most of our daily speech is rough ashlar speech. It's reactionary, full of slang, often imprecise, and occasionally a little bit, well, let's just say less than virtuous. The study of rhetoric is the process of taking that rough language and hewing it into a perfect ashlar of refined discourse. A Mason who is progressing in the craft should also be progressing in his speech. This doesn't mean you need to sound like you just walked out of a Victorian novel, though it's a fun party trick if you can pull it off. It means your speech becomes more intentional. Refined discourse is the ability to communicate with such clarity and kindness that your words fit into the structure of the lodge without creating friction. It's moving from talking at people to speaking with them. When we refine our rhetoric, we are literally smoothing the stones of our social reality, making it easier for brethren to connect and for harmony to flourish. This brings us back to the power of the obligation. Every Mason knows the weight of those words. In the eyes of the craft, those words are more than just a promise. They are a symbolic action that changes who you are. When you speak your obligation, you are participating in a declaration of reality. You are stating that from this moment forward, your relationship with your fellow man is fundamentally different. This is rhetoric at its most potent. You are just saying you'll be a better man. You are verbally laying the foundation stone of a new version of yourself. This is why we take our ritual so seriously in the Grand Lodge of Canada. If we fumble the words, we aren't just making a typo. We are rattling the scaffolding of the reality we're trying to build. When we speak clearly and with conviction, we reinforce the truth of our brotherhood. We make it so because we have declared it so in the presence of the great architect and our brethren. So let's look at the social impact of our speech. Our ritual tells us that brotherly love is the cement that binds us together. I would argue that rhetoric is the application of that cement. Think about the atmosphere of your lodge. Is it a place of warmth or a place of private piques and quarrels? The difference is almost entirely rhetorical. Wise counsel, kind words, and the ability to disagree without being disagreeable are all rhetorical skills. When we speak with brotherly love, our words physically manifest as a harmonious environment. You don't need to be a professional linguist to understand that a well-placed word of encouragement can create a reality of confidence for a struggling brother, just as a sharp, critical comment can create a reality of division. We use our rhetoric to build bridges, to soothe the troubled mind, and to ensure that the temple we are building together isn't just a structure of stone and wood, but a living reality of peace and concord. Mastering rhetoric isn't something that happens overnight. It's a journey mirrored exactly by our progress through the 3 degrees. Each degree offers a different rhetorical working tool that builds upon the last. Every Mason begins his journey in silence. As an entered apprentice, your first rhetorical task is actually to stop speaking. We call this silence and circumspection, or the check on the tongue. Not being suppressed, but rather learning to listen. In our noisy world, we are usually just waiting for our turn to talk. The Entered Apprentice degree forces us to pause. By practicing silence, we learn to observe the inventory of words around us. We begin to understand the weight that words carry before we start throwing them around. So here's a practical tip for the Entered Apprentice and even the more experienced Mason. Practice the 3-second rule. When a brother or anyone in your daily life finishes speaking, count to 3 before you reply. This small act of circumspection ensures you aren't just reacting, but actually processing. It turns your rough ashlar reaction into a perfect ashlar response. When we reach the fellowcraft degree, the curtains are drawn back on the 7 liberal arts and sciences. Here, rhetoric is officially introduced as a necessary skill. Why? Because the fellowcraft is the craftsman. He's no longer just observing. He is interacting with society. The ritual tells us that rhetoric is used to persuade by the force of reason and to fit the mind for use. This is the stage where you learn to organize your thoughts and present them in a way that is compelling and virtuous. It's about becoming an effective communicator so you can actually do some good in the world. Here's a practical tip. Read the ritual aloud. Don't just memorize it. Perform it in your living room. Pay attention to the cadence and the punctuation. Masonry preserves a living language. By speaking these archaic, beautiful sentences, you are training your brain to recognize complex structures and elegant phrasing. It expands your internal architectural vocabulary. Finally, we have the Master Mason. At this level, rhetoric becomes a tool of leadership and education. Whether you ever sit in the East or not, as a Master Mason, you are expected to dispense light and knowledge. Masterful communication is how we pass on the craft. If a Master Mason cannot articulate the principles of the order, if he can't explain why we meet on the level or how we act on the square, then the light he possesses is hidden. Masterful rhetoric at this level isn't about being fancy. It's about being clear. It's about having the ability to offer wise counsel to a younger brother in a way that actually lands. Here's a practical tip. Join the conversation. Many brethren are terrified of speaking on the floor during a meeting. Start small. Offer a notice of motion, or simply stand up during the good of Masonry to thank the visitors. Use the formal language of the lodge, worshipful master, through you to the brethren, I propose, so on. This isn't just lodge etiquette. It's a speech act that reinforces your place in the structure. The cumulative effect of this progression is profound. There's a saying that you can't teach what you don't know, but in Masonry, you can't practice what you can't articulate. Your journey up the winding stairs of speech is a process of making sure that your inner reality and your outer expression are in perfect alignment. When you talk like a Mason, you aren't just using big words. You are using your voice to build a world that is a little more ordered, a little more harmonious, and a lot more enlightened. If you've made it this far, I hope by now you understand how important the tool of rhetoric is to a Mason. It is the bridge between our thoughts and our actions, between our internal values and the external reality of the lodge. When we pick up this working tool, we aren't just learning how to give a better speech. We're learning how to be better builders. We are choosing to move away from the weaponized rhetoric that tears the world apart and toward the constructive rhetoric that brings it together. Every time you offer a word of comfort to a brother in distress, every time you stand on the floor to represent your lodge, and every time you choose silence over sharp reply, you are practicing the high art of Masonic rhetoric. You are laying a stone in that spiritual building, that house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Master your speech, brethren. Fit your mind for use. Use your voice to bring light into the darkness and order into the chaos. This is the Brotherly Love Podcast. Let's get to work.